Isaiah Explained, the book that rewrites every map you navigate by **. Most people approach Isaiah and get lost. 66 chapters of prophecy, poetry, and judgment that seem to shift direction without warning. But what if Isaiah isn't confusing? What if it's the most coherent book in the Bible, and you just haven't been given the right key? In this deep dive, we explore Isaiah not as a collection of ancient sermons, but as a unified argument about navigation, about the false maps humanity keeps reaching for, and the one fixed point in the universe that never moves. From King Ahaz's catastrophic choice in Isaiah 7, to the servant who walks by entirely different coordinates in Isaiah 53, to the unexpected travelers who arrive at the destination in Isaiah 56, this is Isaiah as you have never seen it. Subscribe for more in-depth biblical exploration. Isaiah Explained, Book of Isaiah, Isaiah 53, Isaiah Prophecy, Old Testament Deep Dive, Isaiah Servant Songs, Biblical Theology, Isaiah and Jesus, Isaiah 40, Isaiah Holiness, Old Testament Prophecy, Messianic Prophecy, Isaiah 7 Ahaz, Isaiah New Creation, Sabbath in Isaiah. There is an old problem in cartography. For most of human history, maps were not just imprecise, they were confidently, catastrophically wrong. Coastlines bent in impossible directions. Continents were squeezed into shapes that bore no resemblance to reality. Entire oceans were omitted, and yet sailors followed those maps because having a wrong map felt better than having no map at all. People would rather sail towards something drawn on parchment than admit they were lost. You can survive a lot of things: bad weather, scarce provisions, mutinous crew members, but a wrong map will kill you with quiet confidence. It will not feel like error. It will feel like navigation. I want to suggest to you that this is exactly the world Isaiah walked into, and this is exactly the diagnosis he spent 40 years delivering. The people of Judah in the 8th century before Christ were not godless. That is the part that makes it complicated. They performed their rituals. They offered their sacrifices. They kept the feast days on the calendar. But they were navigating by wrong maps, and Isaiah was the one man in the room willing to say so out loud. 66 chapters, 40 years of prophecy. More direct quotations in the New Testament than any other Old Testament book. And yet Isaiah remains for most modern readers a strange, difficult, almost alien document. Full of beauty they can sense but cannot quite locate, full of meaning that seems to slip sideways every time they try to hold it still. Here is what I want to offer you today. Not a summary of Isaiah's contents, because a summary will not help you. What I want to offer is a way of reading Isaiah, a lens, a coordinate system, that makes the whole scroll click into place. Because Isaiah is not a random collection of ancient grievances and ancient hopes. It is one sustained, unified, devastating, and tender argument about what it means to navigate by the wrong fixed point, and what happens when the right one finally comes into view. The year is approximately 740 BC. To understand the world Isaiah inhabited, you have to understand that Judah was a small kingdom surrounded by enormous powers, and enormous powers in the ancient world meant one thing above everything else: they were terrifying. To the north and east, the Assyrian Empire was expanding with a methodical brutality that is difficult to overstate. Entire populations were deported. Cities were burned to their foundations. Conquered peoples had their identities dissolved into the empire's bureaucratic machinery. This was not the background noise of Isaiah's world. This was the main event. Every political decision made in Jerusalem was made in the shadow of Assyrian expansion, and so Judah did what small nations do when they are afraid. They looked for allies, they calculated, they scanned the horizon for powers that might protect them. Egypt to the southwest, Assyria itself on certain bets, neighboring kingdoms to the north. They drew maps, political maps, military maps, maps that charted relationships of power and protection in a world that felt entirely defined by power and protection. Isaiah's opening move is to name this clearly. The very first chapter of his book does not begin with prediction. It begins with diagnosis, and the diagnosis is blunt enough to be uncomfortable. God speaks in Isaiah chapter 1, and the voice that comes through is not the voice of an offended deity cataloging ritual failures. It is something closer to the voice of a parent watching a child walk toward a cliff. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. The ox knows its owner, and the donkey its master's crib. But Israel does not know, my people do not consider. The comparison to an ox and a donkey is not an insult, it is a grief. Even animals know where they belong. Even animals recognize the one who feeds them. But the people of God have become so thoroughly disoriented that they have lost the most basic navigational instinct, the ability to locate the one who made them. And then Isaiah 1:18 does something that catches every first-time reader off guard. After pages of diagnosis, God says, "Come now, and let us reason together." The Hebrew word there carries legal overtones. It is the language of a courtroom proceeding, but not the language of prosecution. It is an invitation to negotiation. God is saying, let us put the maps on the table. Let us look at them together. Let us see which ones are actually taking you somewhere. This is the posture of the entire book, not a God who has stepped back in disgust and issued a verdict from a distance. A God who keeps leaning toward a people who keep leaning away, and asking them to look honestly at the direction they are headed. Now here is where the story inside the story becomes essential. Because Isaiah does not just preach in general terms, he lives through a moment in history that illustrates his entire argument with devastating precision, and that moment revolves around a king named Ahaz. Ahaz was not a foreign king. He was the king of Judah. He sat on the throne of David. He was the heir of a line of rulers stretching back to the man God described as a man after his own heart. And in approximately 735 BC, Ahaz faced a genuine political crisis. Two neighboring kings, the king of Aram and the king of Israel to the north, had formed a coalition and were marching toward Jerusalem. They wanted to depose Ahaz and install a puppet king who would join their alliance against Assyria. The text in Isaiah chapter 7 says that when Ahaz heard the news, the hearts of the people shook like trees in a windstorm. That is not a metaphor for mild anxiety. That is a civilization-level panic. And into that panic, Isaiah walks with a word from God. He is told to go to Ahaz at the end of the aqueduct, a specific location, a real moment, a recorded conversation, and deliver this message. Take care and be quiet. Do not fear and do not let your heart be faint because of these two smoldering stumps of firebrands. The imagery is almost sardonic. The terrifying coalition marching toward Jerusalem. Two stumps, still smoking but no longer burning. And then God offers Ahaz something extraordinary. Ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as Sheol or high as heaven. This is an open invitation. God is essentially saying, name your terms, ask me anything. Let me prove to you that my word is reliable, that the map I am offering you is accurate. Ahaz refuses. He frames his refusal in the language of piety. I will not put the Lord to the test, but Isaiah sees through it instantly. The reason Ahaz will not ask for a sign is not because he is too reverent. It is because he has already decided which map he is using. He has already sent messengers to Tiglath-Pileser of Assyria with silver and gold from the temple treasury, essentially purchasing protection. He does not need a sign from God because he is not planning to navigate by God. He has already chosen his fixed point, and his fixed point is the most powerful empire in the known world. Isaiah 7:9 is one of the most compressed and devastating verses in the Bible. If you do not stand firm in faith, you will not stand at all. In Hebrew, this is a wordplay that cannot be fully captured in translation. The same root is used twice, amen, to believe, to be established. If you do not trust firmly, you will not be made firm. The map you navigate by is the thing that holds you up. Choose the wrong one and eventually the territory will contradict the map and you will discover, too late, that the ground you thought was there is not. Ahaz chose Assyria, and for a while it worked. The immediate crisis passed. The coalition was broken. Jerusalem was not destroyed. But he had sold the temple treasury to do it. He had hollowed out the sacred center to fund the political calculation. And the Assyria he trusted to protect him spent the next several decades becoming a threat that dwarfed anything the coalition could have done. Navigation by the wrong fixed point does not always feel like failure immediately. Sometimes it looks like success. That is what makes it so dangerous. Isaiah does not walk away from the Ahaz encounter defeated. He does something remarkable instead. He deposits his message with his disciples. Isaiah 8:16 says, "Bind up the testimony, seal the teaching among my disciples." He is creating a record, a document, something that can be returned to when the territory finally contradicts the map. When Assyria, which Ahaz trusted, becomes the same Assyria that stands at the gates of Jerusalem and mocks the God of Israel, Isaiah's words will still be there. This is one of the things that makes Isaiah so unusual among the prophets. He is intensely self-aware about what he is doing. He knows he is not being heard. He knows the maps people are using are wrong. And he knows that the only thing he can do is speak clearly enough that when reality proves him right, there will be a record that the right map existed all along. But then we need to understand what Isaiah's own orientation looks like. What map is he navigating by? The book does not keep this a secret. Isaiah chapter 6 describes a moment early in his ministry when the coordinates of his entire life are established. He is in the temple. The earthly political order has just experienced its own kind of upheaval. King Uzziah, who had reigned for 50 years, is dead or dying, and Isaiah sees something. He sees the Lord, seated, high and lifted up. with the train of his robe filling the temple. Above the throne are creatures that the text calls seraphim, burning ones, and they are calling to one another in a responsorial chant. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. That word becomes Isaiah's compass. Not a concept he holds at arm's length and examines academically. A lived reality that reorients everything. The Hebrew root of kadosh points toward absolute distinctness, toward something so entirely other that no existing category contains it. When the seraphim repeat the word 3 times, they are not being redundant. In Hebrew, repetition of this kind is the equivalent of a superlative with no ceiling. Not merely holy, holiness beyond the reach of any comparison, and Isaiah's immediate response is not inspiration, it is collapse. He says, "Woe is me, for I am undone." But then something happens that sets the trajectory for every chapter that follows. A seraph takes a coal from the altar, the place of sacrifice, the place where the cost of sin was met, and touches Isaiah's lips with it. The burning thing does not destroy him, it cleanses him. Isaiah does not walk out of that temple with a new political strategy. He walks out with a new fixed point. The holiness of God is not an obstacle. It is the only reliable coordinate in a universe full of false ones. Everything he says for the next 40 years flows from this single calibration now. Here is where the book makes its most surprising move. Most readers assume Isaiah chapters 1 through 39 are the judgment section, and chapters 40 through 66 are the hope section. And while there is a real tonal shift at chapter 40, that framing is too simple. Because the hope does not begin with a political promise. It begins with a geographical one, and it is directed at people who have been thoroughly catastrophically lost. Isaiah 40 opens with the word comfort doubled. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. In Hebrew, doubling a word is not redundancy. It is intensity. It is the difference between saying something once at a normal volume and saying it twice with everything you have. The God who established his holiness as the fixed point of chapter 6 is now speaking to people in exile. People whose maps have failed so completely that Jerusalem itself has fallen, the temple has been destroyed, and they are living as foreigners in a land they never chose. And what does God say to people that thoroughly lost? He talks about roads. In the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. Make straight in the desert a highway for our God. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill be made low. The uneven ground shall become level, and the rough places a plain. This is not poetic decoration. This is cartographic language. God is describing the construction of a route through terrain that has no routes, a way through what is, by definition, a place without ways. The wilderness in Isaiah's world was not a romantic landscape. It was death. It was the space between civilization and civilization, the place where water runs out and orientation fails. The Israelites had known this. Their ancestors had spent 40 years in such a place, and the entire point of the wilderness wandering was that, when you are in the wilderness, you cannot navigate yourself out. You need a column of fire. You need water from a rock. You need manna that you did not plant and cannot predict. You need someone who knows the way because you absolutely do not. Isaiah 40 is saying, the wilderness you are in now is real. The disorientation is real. But the God whose holiness has not changed, whose throne has not moved, whose word has not returned void, that God is about to build a road through the middle of it. And then chapter 43 pushes further. Thus says the Lord, who makes a way in the sea, a path in the mighty waters, who brings forth chariot and horse, army and warrior. They lie down, they cannot rise, they are extinguished, quenched like a wick. This is the Exodus. God is reminding his people of the one time in history when he literally navigated them through impossible terrain, through water that had no business having a path in it. And then, and this is the verse that has stopped careful readers for centuries, God says, do not remember the former things, or consider the things of old. Behold, I am doing a new thing, now it springs forth, do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Do not remember the former things. From the God who spent 40 chapters helping his people remember the former things, the God whose credentials rest on having done the Exodus. And now he says, set that down. What I am about to do is so far beyond what you remember that the old memory will actually limit your ability to perceive the new reality. The new thing will make even the Exodus look like a rough draft. This is not a God who is retreating. This is a God who is accelerating, and the terrain he is promising to navigate his people through is not political terrain or military terrain. It is moral terrain, spiritual terrain, the wilderness of human nature itself, the desert that every person who has ever been honest with themselves knows is inside them, not just around them now. In the middle of all this navigational language, a figure begins to emerge. Not a king in the conventional sense, not a military commander, not a political strategist, someone different, someone whose method of navigation is so counterintuitive that when he appears as in Isaiah chapter 42, the description is almost puzzling. Behold, my servant whom I uphold, my chosen, in whom my soul delights. I have put my spirit upon him. He will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not cry aloud or lift up his voice, or make it heard in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a faintly burning wick he will not quench. He will faithfully bring forth justice. This is the first servant song, and the portrait it draws is the inverse of every map the ancient world knew how to read. Power in the ancient Near East was visible. It was loud. It announced itself with armies and monuments and inscriptions carved in stone, listing the cities conquered and the enemies humiliated. The Assyrian annals were essentially a cartography of domination. Here is where we went, here is what we destroyed, here is proof that our fixed point is correct, and here is this servant, who will not cry aloud, who will not make his voice heard in the street, who handles bruised reeds, things already halfway broken, with enough care not to finish breaking them, who tends to faintly burning wicks, things barely still alight, with enough gentleness not to extinguish them. This is not weakness. This is a completely different coordinate system. The servant is not navigating by power or by fear or by alliance. He is navigating by something the text calls justice, but the Hebrew word mishpat carries a weight that our English word struggles to hold. It means right order. It means things being as they are meant to be. The servant's entire orientation is toward the restoration of what has been distorted, and his method is not force but faithfulness. The servant songs move through Isaiah 42, 49, 50, and 52 into 53, and each one adds depth to the portrait. Isaiah 49 reveals something about the servant's scope that expands the mission beyond anything Judah had imagined. It is too small a thing that you should be my servant to raise up the tribes of Jacob and to restore the preserved of Israel. I will make you as a light for the nations, that my salvation may reach to the end of the earth. The servant is not a fix for one nation's exile. He is a navigational reference point for every people who has ever been lost. And then, in Isaiah 50, the servant speaks in his own voice for the first time. He describes what it has cost him to hold the correct course. I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. But the Lord God helps me. Therefore I have not been disgraced. He is holding his course under conditions that should make any reasonable person abandon it. And what keeps him from being disgraced, not from suffering, not from the striking and the spitting, those happen, but from being fundamentally undone is this: he knows what his fixed point is. The Lord God helps me. He is navigating by the holiness of Israel, not by the opinion of those who are striking him, and those are very different coordinates. Isaiah 53 is the place where the servant's navigation reaches its most extreme point. This is the chapter that has made scholars argue for centuries, that has made Jewish readers profoundly uncomfortable and Christian readers profoundly moved, that has been quoted so thoroughly by the New Testament writers that it is almost impossible to read it in isolation from their interpretation of it. But let me slow down here and read it not through the lens of what we already know, but through the lens of what Isaiah has been building toward. Because the specific shock of chapter 53 is not just that someone suffers. It is the direction of the suffering. Surely he has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows, yet we esteemed him stricken, smitten by God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his stripes we are healed. The Hebrew verb for carried in this passage, saval, means to bear a load so heavy it changes the posture of the one who carries it. It bends you, you can see the weight, and the preposition matters enormously. He bore our griefs, not his own. Not the just consequence of his own navigation. Ours, the freight of an entire civilization's wrong turns. This is what no political map could ever account for. No alliance, no military calculation, no diplomatic treaty ever offered to carry the weight of human wrongness itself. They redistributed costs. They shifted burdens from one nation to another. But the servant of Isaiah 53 walks into the full accumulation of human disorientation. Every wrong map ever followed, every false fixed point ever trusted, and carries it in his own body. And then Isaiah 53 verse 10 contains a line that reads like a crack of light through darkness. He shall see his offspring, he shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. After the suffering, after the crushing, days prolonged, offspring seen, The text is describing something that happens after death, not the memory of the servant, not the legacy. The servant himself seeing and prospering. It is a resurrection before the word existed in that form. Alongside the servant, Isaiah places another figure who might seem at first glance to have nothing to do with these cosmic navigational themes. A pagan king. A Persian ruler named Cyrus, whom God calls his anointed one, his Mashiach, a word whose weight in the Hebrew world cannot be overstated. God pours this title onto a man who does not know the God of Israel, who worships other gods, who was born into a tradition entirely foreign to the covenant. And God uses him to do what Israel's kings could not, to let the exiles go home. Isaiah's point here is not simply that God can use unexpected people, though he can. The point is deeper than that. It is that no human map, not Israel's covenant map, not Assyria's empire map, not Babylon's cultural map, contains the full territory of what God is doing. Cyrus does not know he is on God's map. He thinks he is navigating by his own ambitions. But God says explicitly in Isaiah 45, "I called you by name, though you did not know me. I girded you, though you did not know me, that people may know, from the rising of the sun and from the west, that there is none besides me." The God of Isaiah operates in territory that no human cartographer has yet mapped. His sovereignty runs through pagan courts and foreign ambitions and geopolitical accidents that look to everyone involved like pure calculation and chance. The whole earth is already on his map. The question is only whether the people on it know which direction they are facing. Now we arrive at the third movement of Isaiah, and here the book does something I think is one of the most beautiful and under-examined gestures in all of ancient literature. It shows us who arrives at the destination. Most of Judah would have had a clear picture of what the restored Israel would look like. It would look like them, the covenant people, the children of Abraham, those who had maintained the correct bloodlines and the correct practices and the correct membership in the community that God had established. The destination was for those who had belonged all along. Isaiah 56 opens by shattering this assumption with a tenderness that is almost startling. "Let not the foreigner who has joined himself to the Lord say, 'The Lord will surely separate me from his people,' and let not the eunuch say, 'Behold, I am a dry tree.'" These two figures, the foreigner and the eunuch, were the textbook cases of exclusion in ancient Israel. Deuteronomy had specific regulations limiting the participation of both categories. They were, by the best religious understanding of the day, people who existed at the margins of the covenant community. And Isaiah 56 says to both of them, "You have not been reading the right map. For thus says the Lord, to the eunuchs who keep my Sabbaths, who choose the things that please me and hold fast my covenant, I will give in my house and within my walls a monument and a name better than sons and daughters. I will give them an everlasting name that shall not be cut off." The eunuch was a person who could have no descendants. The deepest fear in a culture that understood legacy through bloodline was to end, to have no one who remembered your name, to be a dry tree with no fruit. And God says, "I will give you an everlasting name that shall not be cut off." The very thing you thought you could never have because of what has been done to you, or what you were born as. I will give it to you, and mine will outlast any that biology could have provided. This is where Isaiah's holiness theology arrives at its most intimate point, because the God who is absolutely kadosh, absolutely separate and other, the God whose holiness collapsed Isaiah in the temple, is the same God who says to the most excluded person in the room, "You have a place in my house." The otherness of God does not produce a hierarchy of human otherness. It produces the opposite. When the truly holy enters the room, no human hierarchy can survive it. The distinctions people draw to separate themselves from one another, the bloodlines and the national identities, and the physical conditions that determine belonging, none of those are drawn on God's map. And then Isaiah 57:15, one of the most compressed and extraordinary verses in this entire book, states the theological logic behind all of this. "For thus says the one who is high and lifted up, who inhabits eternity, whose name is holy. I dwell in the high and holy place, and also with him who is of a contrite and lowly spirit, to revive the spirit of the lowly, and to revive the heart of the contrite, high and lifted up." That is the language of Isaiah chapter 6. That is the throne room vision. The absolute holiness, the incomparable otherness, the burning creatures who cannot look directly at him. And then, "And the God who dwells in the high and holy place dwells also with the person whose spirit is crushed," not instead, not in a different mode, simultaneously. This is the theological revolution at the heart of Isaiah. Holiness in every other ancient religion creates distance. The more holy the deity, the more elaborate the system required to approach it. Priests and sacrifices and purification rites and sacred zones. All of it exists to manage the gap between the divine and the human. Holiness is altitude. The higher the God, the further away the ordinary person stands. Isaiah 57:15 destroys this architecture entirely. The height and the nearness are not intention. They are the same attribute expressed in two directions simultaneously. The God who is highest is the God who comes closest. And the person who receives his nearness is not the most ritually prepared or the most politically powerful or the most theologically sophisticated. It is the person with a contrite and lowly spirit. The person who has stopped pretending their map is accurate. The person who has admitted they are lost. There is something worth sitting with here. The Hebrew word for contrite in this verse carries the sense of being crushed, of having been broken under weight. And the word for lowly points toward someone who is genuinely humbled, not performing humility but actually brought low. Isaiah is describing a spiritual posture, and that posture is the one that opens toward God's nearness. Not because God rewards suffering, but because the person who has been crushed has usually, in the process, had their false maps taken from them. They are no longer navigating by pride or political calculation or religious performance. They have nothing left to navigate by, and that emptiness turns out to be the exact shape of what God moves into. Now the book is moving toward its end, and Isaiah does what no other prophet in the Old Testament does with this kind of sustained detail. He describes what the destination actually looks like. Not metaphorically, not in vague gestures toward restored fortunes. He describes a new heaven and a new earth. Isaiah 65:17 says, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former things shall not be remembered or come into mind." The verb create here is bara, the same word used in Genesis 1. In the beginning, God bara the heavens and the earth. Isaiah is using the word reserved for ex nihilo creation, making something from nothing, to describe what is coming. This is not renovation. This is not restoration to a previous state. This is creation at the level of the original act, a world brought into being that has never existed before. And what does this new world feel like? Isaiah gives us textures. People will build houses and live in them. They will plant vineyards and eat their fruit. They will not build for another to inhabit. They will not plant for another to eat. Working and never keeping. Building and never enjoying. Planting and always losing. That will be over. Not because circumstances have improved, because the fundamental relationship between human beings and the world they inhabit has been healed at the source. The wolf and the lamb will feed together. The lion will eat straw like the ox. These are not zoological promises. They are images of a world where the predatory logic of existence has been undone. The strongest is no longer what everything smaller must fear. The hierarchy of violence that has organized every empire from Assyria to Babylon, to every power that came after them, that hierarchy will not survive into the new creation. And then Isaiah 66:22 reaches into something that ties the entire scroll back to its beginning, and further back than that. "For as the new heavens and the new earth that I make shall remain before me, says the Lord, so shall your offspring and your name remain. And from new moon to new moon, and from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship before me." The Sabbath, the seventh day. The rhythm established in Genesis 2, before the garden was lost, before the maps went wrong, before any covenant had been made or any nation had been called. The Sabbath is the oldest marker on God's map. It predates sin, it predates Israel. It predates the law and the prophets and every system humanity has built to manage its distance from God. It was woven into the fabric of creation itself in the first week, a recurring sign that says, there is a rest built into reality. There is a pause that belongs to God. There is a moment in every cycle where the work stops and the created recognizes the Creator. And Isaiah's final vision of the new earth is a world where that original rhythm has been restored, not replaced, not superseded, restored in a creation so thoroughly remade that the Sabbath, which was always meant to be there, is finally honored in its full, unbroken form. From new moon to new moon, from Sabbath to Sabbath, all flesh shall come to worship. All flesh, not just the covenant people, not just those with the correct bloodlines and the correct documentation of belonging. All flesh. Which takes us back to the foreigner and the eunuch of chapter 56, the most unexpected travelers, the ones whose maps were taken from them by circumstances they did not choose. They arrive at the destination Isaiah always had in view. There is a verse I have been carrying throughout this entire conversation, and I want to bring it forward now because I think it is the most honest verse in the book. It appears in Isaiah chapter 30, verse 15. God is speaking to a people in the middle of yet another diplomatic crisis, another moment when they are reaching for the Egyptian alliance instead of trusting the word they have been given. And God says to them, "In returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and confidence shall be your strength." But you would not. 3 words, and they contain the entire human problem that Isaiah has been diagnosing for 66 chapters. Not that the right map was unavailable, not that the true north was hidden, not that the God who calls himself the Holy One of Israel was inaccessible or silent or uninterested. The map was offered, the fixed point was clear, the road through the wilderness was announced, and the people looked at all of it, and chose the thing they could see with their eyes and calculate with their minds and negotiate with their silver. In returning and rest you shall be saved. The navigation Isaiah offers is not a complicated system. It is not a political strategy or a military calculation or a religious program requiring years of preparation. It is a turning, a reorientation, the kind of turn a lost traveler makes when they finally admit that the map they have been following is wrong and look up to find the one fixed point in the sky that does not move. Isaiah 65:1 contains what might be the most surprising line in the entire book. God says, "I was found by those who did not seek me. I was ready to be found by those who did not ask for me." Not the ones who navigated perfectly, not the ones who held the right theology and performed the right rituals and kept the right Sabbaths with the right attitude. People who were not even looking. People who stumbled into the presence of the Holy One of Israel because the road God built went through their particular wilderness. This is the thing about a God whose holiness is true north. He does not move. He does not need to be located by people sophisticated enough to find him. He is already there, in every wilderness, above every false map, outlasting every empire. The question is simply whether a person will stop long enough to look up. Isaiah wrote in a world where the maps kept failing. Assyria rose and threatened to swallow everything. Babylon came after Assyria and finished what Assyria started. The temple fell. Jerusalem burned. The line of David was reduced to a remnant in a foreign land. Every structure a person might have built their navigation on was dismantled. Sometimes violently, sometimes slowly, sometimes through the quiet devastation of watching what you trusted turn into the thing that hurt you. And through all of it, one voice kept saying the same thing in 40 years' worth of different registers. The Holy One of Israel has not moved. The road through the wilderness is real. The servant who carries what you cannot carry is coming. The city at the end of the road has room for people you never expected to see there. And the Sabbath rest that God built into the first week of creation, the rest that every wrong map has been steering you away from, that rest is still available. It was always available. Come now and let us reason together. That invitation, first extended in chapter 1, is still the last word of the book, not the fire and the worm of the final verses, which Isaiah includes with honesty because he is not a sentimentalist, and he knows that some people navigate away from the true north until the very end. But the invitation that has been threaded through every oracle and every servant song and every promise of new creation, that invitation does not expire. The map God is offering is not the one you grew up with. It does not look like the maps made by empires. It does not look like the maps drawn by religious systems trying to manage the distance between the human and the holy. It looks like a road through a wilderness. It looks like a barren woman singing because she is about to have more children than she has room for. It looks like a foreigner and a eunuch walking through a gate they were told they could never enter. It looks like a servant who should have been broken by what he carried, prolonging his days after it. It is a map whose fixed point is a holiness that does not keep you out. It is a holiness that will not let you go until it has finished its work in you. A fire that does not destroy, a true north that has been there the entire time, waiting for you to look up. 66 chapters. 40 years, one argument. The Holy One of Israel knows exactly where you are, and there is a road.